G'day guys. The previous video that I did on the UN resolution, um, threw a few remarks my way. Some people had, from a libertarian point of view, one person said, who gets to determine fascism and stuff like that, that they would have voted against as well, like the United States voted. Yep, people have their opinions of it. Another person said they're also a libertarian, but they sort of said that anything with an ism or socialism or whatever, they'd be against. So they had a different spin. Obviously people have a different spin. That other person came back with a remark and said, well, the Azov group is sort of the bogeyman that Russia talks about. But at the same time, some of the mercenaries sent to Africa, the Russian mercenaries, are also similar to the Azov in a sense. That is a bit true. So, some of the ex-special forces people, the Russian ex-special forces, some of them are quite brutal people and have some very far-right sort of thinking, sort of fascist, neo-Nazi type Russian version of that. That's true. I've actually looked into that. So that person that is a legitimate argument. Somebody else who's even one of my moderators basically he basically said, well, that right wing and all that, and was concerned that I was thinking in terms of UN and one world government or whatever. No, nothing like that. In that regard, you can agree with things. It doesn't mean you subscribe to the whole UN thing, in that regard. There's not an issue with having an international organization where countries can come together and discuss things. That's actually a healthy thing rather than killing each other like we did in the past. The problem is the UN has actually evolved into another beast, which we all know that has got a massive bureaucracy with all sorts of nefarious groups that are financing it, that are inside, that have penetrated it and have actually altered its purpose and are actually running other agendas. That I don't disagree with those people. It's quite clear that the food industry and all that are running the nutrition side of things and making up crap, and the health stuff. Big Pharma are in there, and a whole lot of other organizations that have got vested interests. That's quite clear. And there is quite a lot of corruption in the UN and a number of countries that, let's say, get a bit of a to vote in a certain direction on some of these issues which affect all humanity in that regard. So yeah, I'm not glorifying the UN or the World Health Organization. I'm very critical of those, and you've heard me in the past. But this thing also does not affect. It's not. If it was basically saying, let's ban these organizations, let's lock them up and throw away the key or things like that, or promote that sort of thing, I'd be against it as well. Because generally, I have libertarian tendencies myself, and even I disagree with all these organizations vehemently. I consider myself an anti-fascist and an I don't subscribe to the B-L-M group. They're just the other side of the coin, another extremist group that have ransacked through a number of cities in the US and all that. Their behavior is completely and utterly, criminal. Let's be quite crystal clear about that. And I would never, under any circumstances, give them any credence just because they have a certain opinion of what fascism is. I mean, they consider everyone fascist. That's not them. Everyone's a Nazi or a fascist that's to the right of them, even moderate people, so they have a very skewed way of viewing the world. We need to come back to the actual real definitions, like, people like George Orwell and 1984, that sort of concept of what fascism is. It's basically a statist, a totalitarian system. So let's get that quite clear of what it is. And it's not, it has nothing, fascism and Nazism has nothing to do with libertarianism whatsoever. And if some of these people in these groups have this sort of libertarian thinking, well, they're deluding themselves because it has nothing to do, And even though as a youngster, I had a cousin who was in the far right, second cousin, one of my best mates. And I was an anarchist at the time, and one of my other best mates, and the three of us used to hang together, was a Maoist, So Bill was a Maoist, his mum was Dutch, and his dad was Greek. He's back in Holland, in Netherlands now. Because last time I was in Greece, I couldn't find him, and the family had moved back. So, so I've been around all sorts of colourful people in my life, and even befriended them. And the last thing I am is a person who discriminates just because you've got different political opinions from me, or is hostile or believes locking people up. No, that's what these sort of groups do, not me. So I don't subscribe. And what does it say? What is the resolution saying? It's saying combating the glorification. That means combating the propaganda. So glorification of Nazism, of neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to the fueling of that sort of thinking. That's all it's saying. It's saying to countries, look, we encourage you not to basically support, but when you condemn this sort of rhetoric, or encourage people to condemn it. That's what it's actually saying. It's not saying banning. If it said banning, I'd be against it as well, because I don't believe in banning the people who are fascist, communist, royalists, or whatever. If you want to be a royalist or a communist or a fascist or anarchist or whatever, that's your right, in a free society. So I've got no problems with that, as I said. But I do have a problem with their ideology. I'm not going to subscribe it. It's like my Greek Orthodox faith. I'm not going to subscribe to Satanism. I mean, there are Satanists out there. I don't deny. I'm not going to basically judge them. God will judge them in the end, not me. That's not my role. But I can oppose their thinking and criticize their thinking and argue against their thinking. That means combating their thinking. And that's what that said. Let's just take a quick peek. What does it say? I don't care whether the Russians put it forward or whatever. They're hypocrites, because they're just as bad in some regards, and some of their past history is not glorious on this front in terms of discrimination. I mean, let's not forget that even under the Soviet system, there was quite a lot of anti-Semitism and all sorts of things. So, let's say their history is not illustrious either. But it's saying combating, not banning, the glorification of this type of thinking. Okay? Well, that's what it's actually saying. If it said something different, fine. But any libertarian who, it would be like somebody of faith to say combating, Satanism. No, we're not going to do that. Let them just spread their whole misanthropy around. No, we're going to combat them. We combat veganism. Why? Why do we carnies combat veganism? We combat it for the same reason, because it's a misanthropist ideology which promotes an anti-human agenda. That's why we combat. There's nothing wrong with combating things that we know are false, that we know are evil. Good people should stand up against evil. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing to do with libertarianism. That's a strange view to have. It's a different thing of banning them and a different thing of combating them. So let's get the two things straight, So I think people are very confused. Just because I oppose something doesn't mean I want to, silence it, like what our current illustrious leaders and their tech masters want to do. That's not what I'm promoting, and I don't think most of my subscribers are promoting any of that sort of stuff. We're combating misanthropists of all sorts, Satanists, vegans, the lunatic fringe on both the left and the right, those isms that have intolerance towards freedom, liberty, democracy, and the rule of law and stuff like that. They just want to, if you're an opponent, they want to knock you off. That's their ideology. They want power, status power, and to take away your liberty. So I can't understand why a libertarian would be pro these people. I think people sometimes get cagey. They hear, because extreme left, the B-L-M type crowd, people call everyone fascist, Nazi, and stuff like that. People think that basically it's an I'm socially conservative on many fronts. I'd be opposing myself in a sense. It'd be ridiculous. So that's not what I'm saying. This is actually quite clear and explicit. It's saying Nazis. It's quite clear. It's not saying, conservatives, right wing, far right, or anything like that. It's saying Nazis. It's quite explicit, a specific political movement. So let's not confuse them. Now let's find out exactly what these people are. So from the horse's mouth, not from, because I've actually read Mein Kampf in Greek, not in English, but in Greek when I was in Greece as a youngster. So I know exactly what it says. Most people, and I wasn't even part of the movement, but most people, well, my cousin gave me the book and I actually read it, but most people do not have no idea, even the ones that are supporting it, which is ridiculous. But yes, that is a reality. So, as I said, the devil is in the detail, and this is devilish detail. Okay, Hitler. According to this guy, who studied quite clearly the movement, said Hitler was as much a socialist as Marx. They both shared the same ultimate goal for the socialization of people into a harmonious community free of exploitation. All good deeds, sometimes can go pear-shaped, as they did for these groups, but they differed significantly in the methods required to achieve it. Okay. So who are the fathers of this movement in that regard? Let me just share that again with audio. And I'll have to plug in so I can actually get the key points that we need to cover.
On Drexler defined what National Socialism was. Hitler wasn't the guy who invented it, he just sold it to the masses.
Exactly.
The Munich version of the German Workers' Party was founded on the 5th of January 1919 by...
Did you hear that? The Workers' Party. Okay.
Drexler and Harrer. Even at this point, the name of the party was up for debate. Drexler argued that the word socialist would show solidarity with the working class and keep ties with the other German National Socialist parties in other states.
See the difference? One is a socialist workers, but a nationalist, a specific race, and the other one is the internationalist version. The other side of the coin, which I've talked about. No wonder they hate each other, because they're the main rivals to each other. Got it? Why they hate each other? One's the main rival of the other. As I said, most Americans and many other people around the world are very ignorant about these movements. And that's why sometimes you talk things you've got no idea about. First, learn about the actual movements, what their real ideology is and what they really think, rather than what you perceive or what you've heard from other groups that have made up crap.
On the other hand, Harrer argued that the word socialist shouldn't be part of the title because, by not having it in the title, this would reduce middle-class hostility towards the party.
He still believed in it, in the same concept, but he was concerned that it would be much harder for those in the middle class to join the group.
And without the word socialist in the title, they could present the case that they were advocating social welfare rather than social equality.
Got it?
But the reality was they were doing the latter.
Exactly. So what do both the groups support? Social equality. But one is a nationalist thing of social equality, our nation, our race, and the other one is an internationalist of equality. That's the difference between them, the key difference between them.
Once Hitler became the leader on the 24th of February 1920, the German Workers' Party was renamed. It became the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Yes, the word socialist was added back into the title by Hitler himself.
Got it, guys? Hitler himself actually put the word back. And in my cuff, he goes over and over. It's like, even this guy actually, I agree with him. He says it's one of the worst written books because, you know, Hitler, Adolf just goes over and over the same things to try and reinforce the difference between his type of socialism, which is a national race-based socialism, and the non-race-based socialism, the internationalist of the other group. That's what he goes about it. Where anybody that's read Mein Kampf understands this. Anybody that hasn't has all these other strange notions of the different propaganda of different groups and all that. You've got to read the source if you're going to understand what the movement's about. And that's why I say to libertarians, stop talking nonsense. It has nothing to do with the right. It has quite clearly to do with an ideology which is called a far right ideology, but it really isn't. It is sort of a fusion between elements of an internationalist. So you've got the internationalist group over here that combines the, because remember, anarchists believe in no state, and they are a stateless sort of international. And so what the other group, the other socialists, which is your regular communist parties like existed around, they actually have an internationalist socialism. So it's that sort of version. For them, it's not a race-based, it's a class-based. Where for him, the socialism was basically a race-based. So the working class of Germany, we don't care about the workers of other countries. Just the workers of Germany. It's a race-based. Remember, Hitler was actually a member of the Communist Party and then switched and moved over to the Nazi Party, which at the time was called the German Workers' Party. And he added the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay? So let's make that quite clear, because people are very confused about really what this group was. So he left the Communist Party and joined the German Workers' Party because he believed in this sort of race-based socialism for the German workers.
New Nazi flag, the black swastika in the white circle inside a red field, was created by him as well. And in essence, this was a red socialist flag with a white nationalist flag and a pro-Aryan anti-Semitic flag inside it as well.
So you can see that a lot of you got to understand, a lot of the actual symbolism is similar, but a modification. One is a nationalist symbol, and the other one is an internationalist symbol. But fundamentally, you're talking about a state-regulated system, a command system. That's what Hitler believed in, a command system, and so did Stalin. But in a key.
But this was both socialist, nationalist, and racist. We National Socialists regard our flag as being the embodiment of our party programme. The
See? He actually says it.
red expressed the social thought underlying the movement, white the national thought, and the swastika signified the mission allotted to us, the struggle for the victory of Aryan mankind, and at the same time the triumph of the ideal of creative work, which is in itself and always will be anti-Semitic.
He makes my argument. He just stated it quite clear what it is, what I've been saying.
Thereby removing the need to annihilate the entrepreneurial classes within a civil war.
He just wanted to control them. So he left them in place, controlling them, but they would provide, all these social benefits for the people that worked. As long as you're in the in crowd, you're fine. If you're on the out crowd, that's what the book says.
The greatness of the Aryan is not based. To read from Ziphiora. The readiness to sacrifice one's personal work and, if necessary, even one's life for others shows its most highly developed form in the Aryan race. The greatness of the Aryan is not based on his intellectual powers, but rather on his willingness to devote all his faculties to the service of the community.
That's basically it. The group, not the individual. It's quite clear. Got it? Group comes first, individual comes second. That's what it's saying. Doesn't the other movement say the same thing?
National Socialism is a community where Aryans help each other. The Aryan lives for the state, and self-preservation gives way to the community and the greater race. The spirit underlying this attitude is expressed by the word work, which to him does not at all signify a means of earning one's daily livelihood, but rather a productive activity which cannot clash with the interests of the community.
So your whole life purpose is, it's not about making money. It's not about, anything. It's really that for the group. All you do is for the group. Very similar thinking was on the other side, wasn't there? Heroes of labour, contributing to the great march forward, leap forward, or whatever you want to call it.
For the work which the individual performs is not the purpose of his existence, but only a means. His real purpose in life is to better himself and raise himself to a higher level as a human being, but this he can only do in and through the community whose cultural life he shares.
So if you're inside the community with that cultural belief, so if you're a good party man on either side of the fence, Soviet party man, German party man, as long as you're a party man of the community.
National Socialism allows people to earn a living, but they're all working towards a higher cause, the race. and the community and the race and the state come first. Therefore, National Socialism is absolutely not capitalism. It's more like a beehive. Individuals and even businesses are working to produce honey for the leader so that the race as a whole may survive. They don't like foreigners, and there can only be one queen bee. And if you rebel or if your business doesn't fit the mould, the leader, the state, can get rid of you for the good of the greater Aryan hive. So let's talk about this Aryan business. Hitler says animals breed with their own species, crossbreeding is not allowed in the animal kingdom, and when it happens the offspring is sterile.
We've got the incest wrong. We've just seen what happens to royalty. These people have got bizarre thought patterns, which are not based on science or anything. It's just got really bizarre thought patterns, to say the least.
The Jews. With the Jewish people, the readiness for sacrifice does not extend beyond the simple instinct of individual preservation. Jews act in concord only when a common danger threatens them or a common prey attracts them. Where these two motives no longer exist, then the most brutal egotism appears, and these people who before had lived together in unity will turn into a swarm of rats that bitterly fight against each other.
Got it? So if you're libertarian, what is he describe? What do you think he used to consider the Americans, that were run by the Jews, the Jewish conspiracy of Hitler about the Americans? Because basically he detested liberal democracy or libertarianism. He detested it with a vengeance, libertarianism, because he saw that as basically individuals doing their own thing and only coming together, as we would see that as free men coming together and fighting against evil. He views it as basically these people are vermin. So to pursue individual pursuits or interests or stuff like that is to basically be, against the community, basically against the hive mind. Got it? If you're not basically bowing to the state, remember like George Orwell, 1984, everybody had to bow, to the state. There was no criticism of the state, illegal, or otherwise you'll either end up in a concentration camp or a gulag, one of the two. You can see the pattern here.
Apparently. And he just goes on and on about the Jews. If the Jews were the only people in the world, they would be wallowing in filth and mire and would exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle. The irony.
See, that's what he thinks. He actually thinks that if you have tendencies towards individualism and all that, which my ancestors, the ancient Greeks, they achieved greatness, and they were very, very much Athenian democracy, very much the freedom of citizenry to directly participate in the life of their community. But also they were both supporters of their society, but at the same time they had the right to individual expression and all that. He hates that. He's hostile to that. That's against the community. That's the collective. He's against the collective interests. It's the same concept. It's just one is, focused on being just a clear class-based and nothing else, internationalist class-based, and the other one's basically promoting the notion of a completely different notion, a sort of a racial version of socialism. Yeah, that's where he was already talking about knocking off the
race. If you're part of the Aryan race, you can be a citizen of the socialist state that he's going to create. The People's State will classify its population in three groups: citizens, subjects of the state, and aliens.
Got it? So alien, outsider, citizens, and the other one subject, controlled, slaves, probably other races, you know what I mean? That's what he means, aliens, probably the Italians and his sort of thinking was his allies would they would dominate the planet, and the other ones would be the aliens from the different racial groups, the Italians and the Japanese at the time, and the subjects of the state would be those who they had dominated to be used in any way for the racial community.
The rights of citizenship shall be conferred on every young man whose health and character have been certified as good after having completed his period of military service. On the occasion of conferring a diploma of citizenship, the new citizen must take a solemn oath of loyalty to the national community and the state.
Got it? He's a statist. Loyalty to the state. That's what he's talking about. Loyalty to the CCP, Communist Party of China, loyalty, this is what they talk about. Loyalty, bow down to the state. Do not oppose the state. It's basically, this is authoritarianism, pretty much. Okay? There are different versions of socialism out there. I know, social democratic and other things like that. And they're a different animal altogether. Completely different animal altogether. This is what National Socialism is, and it's very similar to the other socialism of the far left. Okay? The only difference is some elements of one is a race-based one, another one is a class-based. But generally, the state is supreme, controls everything, and those who operate within the state, they will be placed where they are, and those who are loyal will get benefits. Those who are not will be, we know what happens on both sides of the fence. Oops.
The bees get the benefit of having the honey and the protection of the state, but only if they're bees of this state. Foreign bees and other parasites are not allowed.
Or eliminated. Let's just make them eliminated. And here he actually makes it quite clear, the difference between.
Racial Weltanschauung is fundamentally distinguished from the Marxist by reason of the fact that the former recognises the significance of race and therefore also personal worth, and has made these the pillars of its structure. This is it. Hitler has
He's actually spelled it out.
Spelt it out. What differentiates National Socialism from other Marxisms is race. It is socialism, but only for the Aryan. If the National Socialist movement should fail to understand the fundamental importance of this essential principle, if it should merely varnish the external appearance of the present state and adopt the majority principle, it would really do nothing more than compete with Marxism on its own ground.
Got it? Then we're just the same as them. We're just another political party which is competing on the same ground. Got it? And that's why he made that. This is why it was one of the most tedious books to ever read. I had to abandon it a couple of times because I just found it so tedious. The same bullshit over and over again. Not only that, but the same racial stuff over and over again. He just went over and over. If you're not a statist, if you're not loyal to the state and to the racial state, then you're vermin, like the Jews. That was the continuous thing over and over again. It was just like one regurgitation after one regurgitation. He just wanted to reinforce it. It's a bit like very much, this is a very much a propagandist book. It's just reinforcing the same thing over and over again, just making it clear. This is what I mean. Get it through your thick skulls. This is exactly what I mean. This is my version. It's not their version, which is different. Mine's a race-based version. But they're both statist, authoritarian statist systems. Let's make that quite clear.
For that reason, it would not have the right to call itself a Weltanschauung. If the social program of the movement consisted of eliminating personality and putting the multitude in its place, then National Socialism would be corrupted with the poison of Marxism, just as our national bourgeois parties are.
Got it? He makes that quite clear. He makes my point completely and utterly clear. I'll actually attach that in the description if people want to go and see the whole lot of it in that regard. I don't want to basically end up having any copyright issue against me. So that's as far as I'm covering that, just so you guys get an understanding of what really this movement is all about. So, these people that having a go at me about libertarianism, I'm going, well, I'm basically saying, let's oppose these sort of people and their nonsense. And this is what they really stand for. If they've told you something different, then you're deluded. Then basically, and you believe them, then you're deluded. Or you basically got no idea. Or you're not a critical thinker. And I feel sorry for you if you're not a critical thinker. If you don't know what a movement stands for, don't make assumptions. It's like basically not having read a study like the Vagoons do and just flash up the title of it and say, well, this is what it says. Well, have you read it? Have you looked at it? It's like that Ian guy that sent me, that had a bit of a go at me, that young bloke that said, I'm not a vegan. And he had a bit of a go at me, arguing that saturated fats and cause septicemia and stuff like that. It was a better analysis, which was a whole lot of junk studies on one good study. And the one good study actually showed the complete reverse, that saturated fats and monounsaturated fats actually reduced LPS and sepsis and endotoxin in the system. But the other associated junk research was saying the complete opposite. And I say to people, before you basically claim you know something or what it says, read exactly the title. Read exactly what the actual proposal was at the UN. That actually quite said combating, not banning, combating. If it said banning, I'd be against it myself. It said combating. And I think these sort of ideas we should combat. And if you don't believe in that, well, we disagree. Let's put it that way. And I think most of my subscribers would disagree with you completely if you agree with those sort of ideas. But that's from the horse's mouth, from Mein Kampf. That's not Harry saying it. That's Hitler saying it. Exactly what he means by it. So let's clearly state what these people stand for. That's what they stand for, quite clear, and nothing else. And we need to be clear about those sort of things. Very easy to, it's going to be very easy, getting misleading sort of things and people getting confused about what things stand for. For me, details are very important to understand what a group stands for and what it actually says and doesn't say. Look, let me just pause this for a sec, because let me just find what I'm trying to find. Okay, I found that location. Let me just share my screen. So it's hard when you're dealing with this. As you can see, left versus right political spectrum. This is the way we view things. Anarchists, communists, socialists, libertarianism, conservatism, monarchism, Nazism, fascism. That's the way we sort of view it, in a sense. But in reality, this group and this group, when it comes to the social foundation, is similar to this group. Just one is class-based, one is race-based, and this is socially based, sort of, you could say, within a capitalist system, like social democracy, all that sort of stuff. This one tends to basically have less concentration, tends to be a bit more libertarian, tends to have a sort of, it's social democracy type thing, tends to have a sort of a lighter version with some social program, some redistribution, some of that sort of stuff. This is through, we're taking things over even if we have to use violence, and this is, we're going to take things over and even if we have to use violence. That's what these two groups. This group is just outright fascist. It's, like your Penasade in, military dictators, people like Saddam Hussein. It's those sort of people, the coup leaders in Greece in the 70s. That's what these people are. The real far right we're talking about, that have opposed democracy. They believe that a single ruler is the best. Mussolini, that's the type of people that these groups are, and not necessarily racist either, So these far right people are not necessarily racist, I mean, even Mussolini wasn't like about knocking off the Jews or anything like that. Some people that were Jewish were actually part of his movement, so he had a lot of issues with Hitler over some of those issues. So it's not necessarily, racially based at this end. But generally, this group, and this group tends to be very, so those monarchists, Nazis and fascists, communists tend to be very statist. That means the state dominates the life status. The socialists tend to be the ones that are like a halfway house, anarchist, stateless, and the conservatives have a tendency of basically promoting, and the neocons in America, promoting a strong state, a smaller but stronger state. It's a sort of a strange concoction that they have in their mind. It's basically a contradiction in terms, but that's their sort of view. Libertarians tend to basically believe in a small state or very little. And there are libertarian Marxists, and there are libertarian anarchists and libertarian socialists, and all sorts of flavors, and libertarian conservatives as well. So this group, there are people in this group that have those tendencies, in this group that have those tendencies. We're not talking about the sort of traditional communists like in the Soviet. We're talking about some of the, like in Greece, what's his name? The ex-finance minister of Greece, Varoufakis. He's sort of like a socialist libertarian or a communist libertarian. He calls himself all sorts of things anyway. And then, so this sort of group is you could say pure. And what does that mean? Hard to define. Many people have different versions of their own libertarianism. Others consider themselves, conservative libertarianism, socialist, communist, or anarchist libertarianists. There's a lot of flavors of libertarianism. So this doesn't actually fit. So this sort of line, which is sort of the traditional left-right line that actually, in the real world, humans are very eclectic and the different shades of all sorts of things. That's the reality, just so people have that understanding of what people are. I know people like to pigeonhole certain people, but I'm a very eclectic person. I've very much sort of consider myself a bit of all these three. So when it comes to, I'm very socially conservative. I don't believe in things like abortions and and things like that, because I've got my religious faith and stuff like that. I don't believe in that sort of stuff, and many other things. I don't like strong state power, so that comes into here. I believe that you need a state, but it needs to be, also direct democracy. So I'm very much in this camp of direct democracy where people have, and I believe in practical policies, and I'm not really concerned whether they have a bit of right-wing or left-wing elements to them, or a mixed match. Practicality really isn't clearly ideologically. I mean, people like to pigeonhole certain views, but you can have certain views that may sound a bit left or a bit right from the center. But in the end of the day, if they're practical and they work, it's a very different way of viewing things. But I don't believe in a big state. I think the more powerful a state is, the less freedom people have. And I definitely am opposed to the state setting prices or capping things or whatever things, That doesn't mean I don't believe in regulation on industry and stuff like that. I do. I don't want industry just pumping out, filth inside the rivers and coastlines while they are sitting on some tropical islands and while they're dumping in the immediate environment that I live in. So there've got to be regulations that regulate behaviours and activities. You have to have traffic lights and stuff like that. So there are things that the state needs to do, which are the practical stuff of regulations. And then there is the woke nonsense, which has nothing to do with practicality or a well-functioning society. That's basically ideologically driven nonsense that is trying to impose and control. It's no different than what this group does, that group does, that group does, and that group does. Okay? Try to impose their belief systems on everyone else. It's authoritarianism. So let's make that quite clear. But also some level of taxation and all that, because at the end of the day, the people that are working those jobs and all that, they're not making the profits. And as I've said in the past, everybody takes risks in a society and everybody contributes to the creation of a complex society. So some level of taxation to be able to cover for roads, infrastructure and all that, when these people are getting the most benefits, that are the wealth classes, the elites basically getting the most benefits, they should contribute a bigger share, because all they're doing is administering things. Yes, they're taking some risks with their money, but how do they get their money? Other people's labor, and by printing a lot of money, their friends printing a lot of money for them, so they can actually overinflate assets and actually become wealthier much more rapidly. Not from making new ideas or generating new stuff like in the past people used to do. In the past, when people did that, they were the disparity between rich and poor was much less. Once you had money printing, you could actually overinflate and actually price everybody out of the market. That's crony capitalism, which I disagree with. So there's a lot of things like that, which I will agree with you guys. And maybe on the thing that I lose you is a bit on the taxation side, but there you'll lose me, because I do believe that if you're going to have a big middle class, you've got to limit the ability of these people to be able to overinflate assets and actually price the middle class out. You can't have it both ways. When there's just so much of a pie, You've got to use some sort of mechanism. And the only mechanism without over-regulating the economy, which can cause problems, my personal opinion is that if you over-regulate, try to fix prices or whatever, or salaries or whatever, it just doesn't work. The easiest way is to just use taxation. And that's a different type of method where you can cover, and it means basically on the citizenry. You don't necessarily have to give that back to the actual average worker or whatever. But if you're paying for their education and health, it means they don't have all those out of pocket at all, which means then they've got more disposable income. And then you use the excess that you've got from the elites to cover for road infrastructure and all that serves all these people. And in particular, the productivity gains actually go to the top end anyway. So they might as well pay for a lot of that sort of stuff. That is a much better way of actually running things. And if you've got direct democracy, you'll actually get that sort of stuff. That's what you were getting in ancient Greece. Because people are reasonable. They're not silly to blow the whole system up. They realize that they used to tax the aristocrats in proportionality, not overtax them. And that's the way it should work. And it did work quite successfully until, obviously they started using orators, which we call the mass media, to manipulate people's minds in order to overthrow the system. So that's something, if we ever go to direct democracy, we'll need to basically prevent ownership of the media by them. We have to basically decentralize it and make it for everyone. So we're all got voices. It may be very noisy, but you know what? I'd rather have noisy rather than just one single voice like Hitler wanted or Stalin wanted. You can't have it both ways. So, in order to get true liberty, you got to prevent one person from dominating the voice. So, people say, oh, well, these rich people, you take away their voice, their right to have their own media company. Yes, I am. Because if they have it, then they've got a propaganda piece no different than if they control the state itself. Why should they have more of a voice than me? That's not real democracy, is it? So you can't have it both ways. You've got to think these things through, guys. I hope this is a lot of food for thought, or rethinking some of your own assumptions about things, because a lot of people have very strange assumptions about a lot of things. And I'm not saying that my views are perfect. They're probably flawed in a number of places. As an Orthodox Christian, I view this as a fallen realm. This isn't a perfect, a paradise. This is basically a fallen realm where we've got the choices to make, choices that basically can move us towards the light or towards the darkness. And we'll be judged at the end about that. But while we're in this realm, at least try and make it workable, so it's not basically like a hell on earth either. So, we're encouraged to fight evil, and, so it's not trying to make a paradise on here, because that's just a pipe dream. That's a utopian pipe dream, but basically make a better society in that regard, that is not as evil by combating evil. We're actually moving towards the light, encouraging others to move towards the light. Well, that's a good thing to do, And I think generally most people have those general tendencies to want to do good most of the time. And that's what there's nothing wrong with combating evil, Nazism, other authoritarianisms and stuff like that, and doing that. We don't have to ban them. That's not what I'm claiming, but we need to combat evil. So that's a different sort of concept. And it's no different even in an agora of arguments, like a free direct democracy agora of arguments where we sit down and argue with each other. We're combating certain views that we disagree with. That's what I'm talking about. I would never, countenance, I would never promote an idea of suppressing a group. That would be against my own core beliefs. But at the end of the day, I'm going to combat them. You betcha. if I disagree with them. You know, what do you think I'm doing on this side? What do you think Bart's doing, you know, combating the Vagoons? He's not banning them. He's not basically denying them the right to exist or whatever. He's basically combating their misanthropic arguments. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a good thing. We should do that, those sort of things, and encourage the whole community to do those things. You know, we should point them out, these people, these evildoers and people that are promoting misanthropy of any sort. So, well, that's my take anyway. Some of you, I hope the majority of you agree, but some of you may disagree even after this one. So be it. I can't please everyone, and that's it, you know. So anyway, see yous.